Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex.
Open up, you open up.
Hi guys, I'm Hannah.
I'm Sadie.
And we're not straight.
Welcome back to our channel. Or
Yes.
welcome if you're new here.
Yes. We're going to start with Patreon patron shoutouts because we have some new patrons that we want to recognize. So thank you so much to Becca C,
Christy C,
Kristen,
and Rachel B.
you guys are the best. Book club is starting, so if you haven't joined yet, join right now. There's still time.
Check it out.
Yeah.
Last week, we started talking about one of my favorite topics. Sarcasm.
Yeah.
Sex and religion.
Sex and religion, two of her favorite things.
Yes, two of my favorite things. So we talked about my experience with religion, which is a lot, and how that plays into like my perception of sex, and then we talked a little bit about the ways that that affects other people, and we got a lot of really interesting feedback from you guys. So today we wanted to talk about the idea of sex without a penis. I know, groundbreaking, and talk about the ways, different things that feed into that, and what that looks like.
Yeah.
If you're someone who has experienced sex without a penis, you are probably well aware of the different perceptions about sex that kind of influence the way that we understand it. So
let's start with the overall question. What is the purpose of sex, if not a man's pleasure or for a man to impregnate a woman?
just to like comment on those two like ideas being the foundation of it first, those ideas come from like our experience with like society and specifically sex ed in public schools. Like I feel like I learned about like wet dreams and like boys masturbating and like what sex is, meaning sex is when a man puts his penis into a woman's vagina. That was the definition. And so it was very male centric, and even when it wasn't to get pregnant, it was very centered on like male pleasure. So like talking about masturbation and like wet dreams and stuff, like we never talked about girls masturbating or anything. Like we always it was always about boys, and it was like as if girls didn't do that and it wasn't a thing.
You also talk about like the first time a kid gets a boner, like a boy gets a boner, and that's like this coming of age thing. And the other thing they talk about for women for coming of age is like menstruation.
Yeah.
And they talk about you like becoming a woman because you had your first period. And they try to make it not embarrassing and whatever, but somehow in society it's still super embarrassing when most people with a uterus do have periods, and it's super normal, and somehow we still can't talk about it.
Yeah.
So even the part that was about girls and women
was like embarrassing and like hush hush, and like don't talk about it in front of boys because they'll think it's gross.
Yeah.
Stuff coming out of girls is gross, stuff coming out of boys is normal. That was like the message I got.
Yes. Okay. So with that premise, let's start with the idea of pleasure if it's not about a man.
Yeah. I think like based on my own perspective, like put very simply, the message that I got was that if you're having sex with someone with a vagina, like the pleasure of that person is like a bonus. Like it's a secondary. Like we hear so much about women faking it.
Oh.
Which the general message behind a woman faking it or someone with a vagina faking it is that like they want it to be over.
Yeah.
So it's like you're not enjoying it. There's not pleasure like involved in it. You're doing it for something other than like your own pleasure.
Own enjoyment.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I know that you can have sex and have like a enjoyable experience without having an orgasm. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But then you shouldn't have to fake one. Right? You know, like
or it's for like the male ego.
Yeah.
So it implies that in you faking an orgasm, you get to get out of it without making the man feel bad.
Yeah.
For you not finishing. Like
it's
how
your own
absurd
fault.
is that? Yeah, as if it's your own fault. Oh, or there's so much like twisted conversation around how women are so hard to figure out, and it's like this elusive, the female orgasm is elusive and difficult, and it's not that complicated. I feel like that's propaganda that, like, makes it easy for men to be like, oh, women, you know how they are. Like, it takes them 45 minutes, and it's like, well, if you're really bad at it and you don't care, then maybe.
Or if, like, I don't know, if you're having a good time for 45 minutes, then that's
more
fantastic.
power to you.
Like, that's great.
Yeah.
But I think the idea that, like, the female orgasm is, like, so elusive or, is based around the fact that we are taught to not masturbate. Like, there's just, we don't even talk about it. I didn't even know that was a thing for so long. And we talk about boys masturbating, like, all the time. But never, never girls, never people with vaginas having the same sort of experience. And because we don't talk about it, we're not encouraged to figure it out for ourselves. There's no, if it's something you don't talk about and something you are not encouraged to learn about, I think you're less likely to go explore on your own. I know that many people with vaginas do explore on their own and figure out what is pleasurable to them, but that isn't encouraged. And so then when you go to have sex, how do you know what to tell the person you're having sex with? How do you know how to communicate about your own needs and wants and, like, what feels good to you or what is, like, what your preference is?
And if it's already an uphill battle, no one's going to advocate for you and your pleasure but yourself. Unless you have a really awesome partner. And I feel like that's how every partner should be. Every partner should want you to feel pleasure, but it's hard to fight for that if you don't even understand it for yourself.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, if someone asks you, how do you want to do this? Like, how do you like to have sex? Whatever. And you're like, I don't know. You know? Like, that is a painful experience too.
Yeah. And it can feel really awkward, especially if it's hard to talk to your partner about sex in the first place. If you don't have the language for it, then that's like an additional barrier to cross. Yes. So you brought up one thought. There was this kid in high school, I remember his name. There was a rumor going around that he could jack off in like 52 seconds. And this was like applauded somehow or celebrated as like this awesome thing. And I don't know if we were like making fun of it or like celebrating it, but the fact that everyone knew that it was a thing and talked about it and joked about it, I wanted to be like, I could match that. But I'm not going to brag about it, and it seems like I'm not supposed to say that out loud, right? Even saying that just now like makes me blush, which is crazy because I feel like men can talk about it so easily.
Right. I'm just imagining like you saying that to like other people and be like, I mean, I could do that too, and people being like, what? Like, that's weird, right? Like you know that would be like
even
how
your
that's
reaction.
Received.
Yeah, just right now was that your reaction? Okay, so that brings me to duration. I want to talk about duration. So people make fun of men for not being able to last very long, right? It's like it's a common stereotype or joke that like men can't hang on and then they're done and it's been like 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever the joke is.
46 seconds.
52 seconds.
52 seconds, yeah.
And we shouldn't shame men for that. That's shady, first of all. But also, often, it does take women longer. And so if the man is finished, sex is then something that only takes like 5 to 10 minutes and you can be on your merry way. Right. And I think that becomes a barrier for relationships who are trying to, or people who are trying to have sex without a penis. It's like a bigger ordeal. So I think maybe that lends itself to like lesbian bed death. Is that a thing? Am I like...
That sounds reasonable to me. Can I add something different? Is the idea of like what counts as sex.
Yes.
So like what I was taught is that sex is between a man and a woman. The man has a penis, the woman has a vagina. Like that's the only definition, right? And sex is when a man puts his penis into the woman's vagina. But there's also oral sex, there's anal sex, but these are qualifiers, right? It's not real sex. They're different kinds. And you can still be a virgin if you don't have those kinds of sex,
Virginity.
Right? That's another thing. So then there's a question of if there isn't a penis involved, like what counts? That to me it's a really complicated question, and I think that it ultimately, short answer is it's different for everyone. But the long answer is we should be talking about it. We should be talking about what counts for me. what do I want? And I don't have to want the same kind of sex as anyone else. And it can even be different between partners. Like, it doesn't have to be the exact same thing. And that's okay. That's totally fine. That doesn't make it less real. It doesn't make it mean more or less. It is what it is. And we should have those conversations more. And I think that we should be having those conversations even if we are in heterosexual relationships or in relationships between someone with a penis and someone with a vagina. Like, that shouldn't be a question only for people who are having non-traditional sex or sex that doesn't align with my public school sex education.
Which is so lacking. That's
it was like, it was like
so
6 minutes long, right? Like,
Okay, so then if we want to talk about virginity, if you have two women in a relationship, how do you decide what losing your virginity feels like? Is it whatever feels like the biggest deal? Like, I think that's what it seems like for heterosexual couples. Like, the biggest deal is to go all the way, like, home base, it's full penetration.
And I think it's the biggest deal because it has the potential for such great, like, consequences doesn't seem like the best way to put kids, but it has the potential for such great, like, great impact.
Life-making or maybe devastating.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think losing your virginity is the same thing as what counts as sex. Like, you get to decide for yourself. But I also have a bone to pick with the idea of losing your virginity.
Yeah, virginity, it seems like a bad social construct to begin with. It comes along with, like, purity and, like, saving yourself for marriage. And we talked about that a little bit, but we could probably just throw the whole thing out the window.
I do think that losing your virginity is something that is perceived very differently for people with penises and people with vaginas. I think that if you have a penis, losing your virginity is this, like, conquest that you're, like, it's like an adventure that you're trying to achieve, like, whatever your frame of mind is around it. It's like, it is hugely important. Whether you're like, I'm gonna save myself for marriage, it's like, oh, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, like, it's so hard for me to, like, restrain myself, or you're, like, trying to get it done by the time you're 15, and that's, like, a huge, effort, dedicating all of this time to it. Whereas if you have a vagina, you're taught to save it, like, keep it, lock it in a box, or literally lock it in, like,
a chastity belt.
A chastity belt, like, that's a thing, not for men but for women.
Oh my God. Or that a woman loses value.
Yes.
Once she has sex, whereas a man gains value.
Yes. And the idea of the double standard of virginity is super, super well researched.
Discussed and
understood by a lot of people, but it doesn't feel necessary to me personally. I think that it is it can have hugely damaging effects, and I think that if we are taught to focus our energy on knowing ourselves and saving ourselves for our own wants and needs and, like, putting ourselves first, and then if we are in a partnership with someone else, whether that's a relationship or just having sex, like, that we can then communicate that. The idea there is that we're listening and we're communicating honestly. That is so important, and that feels like it would be such an easy, like, switch, instead of focusing all of our energy on either, like, the conquest of losing your virginity or saving it, we could focus it on knowing ourselves and understanding what our wants and needs are so that we can have the best experience possible. That is a greater gift.
It also seems like the quickest and best path toward, like, pleasure from all parties.
Yeah.
And, like, intimacy. Like, that kind of honest communication seems like the most relationship building also.
Yes.
Even if that's not your goal. Even if your goal is just pleasure or whatever your goal might be.
Right.
That still seems like the best way.
Yeah.
So that brings up the idea of slut shaming.
Yeah.
So I know we were talking about women losing value, like societal value, once they've lost their virginity. Women are not really allowed to want sex, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that? Like,
yes.
When it's totally okay for men, one, and two, that's like a badass thing to be able to admit and be like, no, you know what? I have sexual needs and desires, and I'm going to go after them. And I can do that safely. I can do that with dignity.
Yeah.
I can get as much pleasure as I want out of this world as long as I'm doing it with consent and communication and all of those
Right.
things, obviously. That should be, like, celebrated.
Yeah. And I think we're also even, like, more so, doubly or, like, exponentially so for women with disabilities, for fat women. Like, we're not taught that you can want sex and pleasure. Like, we're taught that, like, your worth comes from the penis. Like, that always
Yes.
comes from the penis. So, like, if you have any sort of, like, oppressed identity, it's even more so. Like, it's exponential, I think.
Or it's, like, fetishized. Like,
yes, or fetishized.
it's,
Oh my
like,
God.
tied to your attractiveness. It's tied to your desirability.
Yes.
And then punished if you are super attractive and super desirable and you go for it anyway, then you're a slut.
Right.
So it's like your sexuality or your sexual essence
Yeah.
is like based on your appearance or attractiveness to men is the implication.
Yeah.
And by attractiveness, I mean like society's gold standard of attraction, which
Right.
is someone who is like able-bodied, thin,
Has, like, big boobs. Right?
yeah. Yeah. Which, fuck that. Women are beautiful. All
Yeah.
women are beautiful. All people are beautiful. And all people should be celebrated as being beautiful for their uniqueness, for
Right.
their...
And I think that there is, like, there is so much dignity in having sex. Like, there is so much dignity in having a sexual identity. And if not having sex is part of your sexual identity, that is included too. Like, but there is so much dignity in having a sexual identity, and there's so much humanity in it. And when we decide that you don't get to have that just because you are this, or this category, then we just take part of your humanity away. That's super fucked up.
It's messed up. Yeah, that's a good point. It's very universal. And I like your comment about asexuality or demisexuality, anyone on the ace spectrum. There's a ton of dignity in that too. It's just about like your
Yourself.
choice.
Yeah,
it's
knowing
a-
yourself.
It's a choice that you deserve to make for yourself.
And you deserve to be able to act on.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
if part of my identity is that I don't want to have sex or I don't want to have sex a certain way, I should be able to communicate that and have that be respected by society and by the partners that I choose to be with or not choose to be with. And that is just like a really, really base level of human respect and like honoring another person. And if we can't even do that, are you serious? It's so fucked up. Like, we obviously can't do that.
Right. That
Which is why
feels
we're
like
talking about it.
a small nod back to our last video about religion and sex. It was okay to be homosexual but not act on it.
Yes.
So it's like they're trying to validate your worth as a human but not as a sexual human, even though that is inherent in all of us. Even if you're an asexual human, you have a sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last thing that we want to talk about that I think ties into, like, I don't know, all of this is frequency.
Oh,
so
yeah.
people talk about frequency of sex and have all of these expectations that I feel like we're all supposed to know and understand and agree on, when in reality no one does. And
Right.
all relationships are different. So between a man and a woman, I've heard jokes, I've heard laments, complaints from men about how they don't get to have sex enough with their wives or whatever. Someone's like sexually dissatisfied because the frequency is too few and far between.
I think, yeah, the opposite of that is never really discussed. Like, we don't talk about being dissatisfied from having too much sex,
Yeah.
which that seems like a missing piece of that conversation.
Yeah, if there are people who are in relationships where they're having sex at like, if your frequency is mismatched with your partner,
Yeah.
your desired frequency,
Yeah.
and your partner,
Wants,
I don't know,
wants a
more.
lot of sex and you don't, that isn't okay either.
Right.
Another thing that I was taught in, like, my sex ed classes was that boys... actually, I remember having an all-school assembly when I was in high school. And we went to this assembly, and it was this guy talking about the fact that high school boys think about sex once every 60 seconds. And I remember looking around and being like, whoa! Like, that's insane! And I was like, I don't feel like I ever think about sex. Like, that is crazy to me. So I remember getting this message that if you have a penis, you're constantly like on the hunt and like you're constantly like after having sex. Like that was the message that I got, right? And first of all, that's not real. I don't believe it.
Every man.
Not
Not
everybody with a penis is like, I'm gonna find something to put it in, like
right now.
all the time. That's so crazy. But then the other message was that people with vaginas don't really want sex. And so there's always this just like disconnect. So when you take the penis out of the equation for having sex, the question of like how often should you have sex is just like magnified, right?
Yeah, there's like a void, like with no answers.
Yeah, there's no answers. And that's another opportunity for conversation, I feel like, if you are having sex with someone, whether they're your partner or not, there's an opportunity to discuss like how often do you want to have sex? Like, does that match with me? Like, what can I, how can we make this work? And there is an assumption that if you're in a relationship where one person has a penis and the other one has a vagina, that the person with the penis wants to have sex a lot and you're just gonna kind of tough it out if you have the vagina. Like,
or you're going to have this mismatch and you're gonna refuse to have sex and it's gonna be this huge like rift in your relationship. One more thought about this like frequency mismatch idea. Masturbation should be kind of a way to fill in that gap, in my mind. It feels like an easy way to help achieve better alignment in like how often you want to orgasm. Unless your sole desire when you're having sex with your partner is that like intimacy and that connection with the other person.
And I think it's okay. Like, I think that masturbation is like a piece that you can add even if you want to have sex the same amount. Maybe you don't want to have like partnered sex with someone all the time, even if you love them, or whatever, or even if they are your only partner or whatever.
That's true.
But it should be something that we talk about. Like, it should be something that people are encouraged to do, if that's something that they want to do.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, some basic questions that you can ask your partner, whether you are in a relationship that is deemed a heterosexual relationship or a queer relationship, whatever, are, hi, do you want to have sex?
Consent.
Yes.
Consent.
Most importantly. Also, how do you want to have sex? What do you enjoy? What do you like? And how can I play a role in that? And then can I tell you what I like? And how often do you want to have sex? Or is today a good time?
And like, is there anything that's off limits? Is there anything that has like trauma surrounding it that I should know about? If you feel comfortable sharing. If you're in a relationship where you'd like to be more adventurous, should we have a safe word?
Do you like to have sex with toys? Like, is there something else that we can bring into the relationship that would make you feel more comfortable, or that would make you like have a better time,
Yeah.
All of these questions are things that we should be asking our partners regularly, consistently, and it's okay if it changes, and we should be actively listening to the other person without judgment.
Yeah, and talking about like how you might feel about your own genitalia. We didn't talk about this much, but your own like gender expression and gender identity can come into play here too. And that's something that it's really helpful to understand about your partner too.
Right, yeah.
So that's another thing to talk about.
And I think like I lament the fact that it isn't assumed that you would always have these conversations if you were in a relationship that is heterosexual presenting. And I feel bad for that. That sucks.
Yeah,
I don't want that. I want this healthy conversation around sex for everyone. Sorry.
Go. Do it.
I was just going to say, and that these conversations are not a burden. Like,
they shouldn't be.
The presumption that heterosexual sex is like the norm and like, oh, we don't have to talk about it.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God, right? Or you might talk about it, but it's only like, can we have sex today? Yes or no, Or like, do you want to get pregnant or not?
Yeah.
And those are the only questions. These are fruitful, thought-provoking, and like validating conversations to have.
And empowering
Yeah.
and relationship building. And if you're a straight woman or a straight man watching this, have those conversations. Do it for your partner. Do it for yourself. It's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
So to everybody in the universe,
Talk about sex.
baby,
Talk about you and me.
not me, but like,
You want to just sing this song? Let's talk about sex, baby.
let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex. Nice. That was good. Okay, we'll leave you with that.
That's it.
And I guess we'll see you on Friday and then again on Sunday. Bye.